The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, March 8th, but the money had been gone since Monday night. By the time Claire Whitfield opened that envelope, her hands shaking, her coffee going cold on the kitchen counter, her husband, Daniel Whitfield, had already moved $9.4 million out of their shared accounts across 7 shell companies into a private holding structure she had never been told existed. She had spent 16 years building a life with this man. He had spent 3 of those years quietly building a wall around every dollar she had ever trusted him with. And he had done it perfectly. Or so he thought. Claire Renee Whitfield was 44 years old when her world collapsed. She was a registered nurse at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee. She worked long shifts in the cardiac unit, 12 hours on her feet, nights, weekends, holidays. The kind of work that leaves a person too exhausted to ask questions when they get home. She had met Daniel at a fundraising gala in 2005. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who remembered the names of every person in the room. He told her he was building something real in Nashville's real estate market. Commercial properties, mixed-use developments, long-term vision. She believed him. Within 2 years, they were married. Within 4, she had contributed her entire savings, $340,000, into his first major development project. He told her it was an investment in their future. She told herself it was love. From the outside, the Whitfields looked like a success story. A beautiful home in Belle Meade, charity dinners, a lake house in Hendersonville, 2 cars in the driveway, and a husband whose name appeared in the Nashville Business Journal every 6 months. Claire worked her hospital shifts and trusted Daniel with every financial decision. He handled the accounts. He filed the taxes. He managed the investments. She told herself that was simply how their partnership worked. But there were things she had never been allowed to question. Daniel Harmon Whitfield was 51 years old. To Nashville's business community, he was a self-made man, respected, generous with handshakes and dinner invitations. His business firm, Whitfield Capital Group, had completed 11 commercial projects across Tennessee between 2009 and 2021. What no one knew was that Daniel had been living a parallel financial life for nearly 4 years. He had a girlfriend in Charlotte, North Carolina. Her name was Tessa Malone. She was 33. Daniel had purchased a condominium in her name in 2019 for $812,000. He had been funding that life entirely with money from Whitfield Capital Group, money that was equally Claire's under Tennessee marital property law. But Daniel had a problem. Claire had started asking questions in late 2021. Small questions at first. A bank statement she couldn't find. A tax document that referenced an account she didn't recognize. She had mentioned it casually over dinner one evening in November. Daniel had laughed it off, changed the subject, refilled her wine. But he had gone upstairs that same night and called his attorney. He had already been planning his exit for 8 months. After Claire's dinner question, he accelerated the timeline. He had made his decision. Now he moved. Between January 2022 and February 2022, Daniel Whitfield executed one of the most deliberate financial dismantlings ever documented in Davidson County divorce proceedings. He began on January 4th. He transferred $2.1 million from the Whitfield Capital Group operating account into a shell company he had registered 18 months earlier in Delaware. The company was called Meridian Assets, LLC. It had no employees, no office, no business purpose. Its registered agent was a law firm in Wilmington that specialized in corporate anonymity. On January 19th, he moved an additional $1.8 million into a second entity, Crestline Holdings Group, registered in Wyoming. Wyoming has no public disclosure requirements for LLC ownership. Daniel had known that since 2020. He didn't stop there. By February 3rd, 5 more shell entities had received transfers: Oakfield Bridge Partners, Sumner Valley Investments, Third Meridian Capital, Blue Path Real Estate Group, and a final holding company called Harmon Realty Trust, named deliberately after his middle name, not his surname. Total transferred $9.4 million, moved across 7 entities, spread across 3 states over the course of 41 days. The transfers were structured to stay beneath federal reporting thresholds at each individual step. Daniel had studied this. He had been careful. Claire knew nothing. She was working nights in February, 12-hour shifts, coming home at 7 a.m. and falling asleep by 8. But in the second week of February, she found something she wasn't supposed to find. She had gone into Daniel's home office to look for their 2020 joint tax return. She needed it for a refinancing inquiry on a property she believed they still jointly owned. In the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, behind a folder labeled Vendor Contracts, she found a single page. It was a wire transfer confirmation dated January 4th for $2.1 million, sent to an account in the name of Meridian Assets, LLC. She had never heard that name in her life. Claire sat in that office for 40 minutes without moving. She didn't confront Daniel that night. She didn't say a word. The next morning, while he was at a site meeting in Murfreesboro, she drove to the office of Margaret Ann Holloway, one of Nashville's most respected family law attorneys. She brought the wire transfer confirmation in a manila folder. Margaret Holloway looked at it for 30 seconds. Then she looked at Claire and said, "We need a forensic accountant today." Over the next 3 weeks, Holloway's team worked with certified forensic accountant Robert Dean to reconstruct every financial movement Daniel had made since 2019. What they uncovered was methodical, calculated, and damning. 7 shell companies, $9.4 million, a condo in Charlotte paid for with marital funds, and a second woman who had been receiving a monthly living stipend of $6,000, also drawn from Whitfield Capital Group revenues. The total amount diverted from marital assets, $11.2 million over 4 years. When Daniel was served with divorce papers on March 8, 2022, he did not look surprised. He looked at Claire once, then he looked away. His attorney, Bradford Sims of Sims & Cawley in Nashville, immediately filed a motion arguing that the shell company assets were premarital business investments and not subject to equitable distribution under Tennessee law. Daniel also contacted Meridian Assets' registered agent the same afternoon he was served. He attempted to initiate a secondary transfer that would have moved the funds offshore to an account in the Cayman Islands. The transfer was blocked. Margaret Holloway had already obtained a court-ordered asset freeze 48 hours earlier. He had moved too late. The case was heard before the Honorable Judge Patricia Elaine Sorrells at the Davidson County Circuit Court, Division 5 in Nashville, Tennessee. The docket number was 22D-1847. Proceedings began in September 2022. Margaret Holloway built her case around one central argument. Every dollar transferred into those 7 shell entities was marital property under Tennessee Code Annotated Section 36-4-121, and Daniel Whitfield had committed fraud upon the court by concealing those assets during mandatory financial disclosure. Bradford Sims countered that Whitfield Capital Group had always been Daniel's sole proprietorship, predating the marriage, and that the transfers represented legitimate business restructuring. He submitted a series of internal memos attempting to frame the shell company formations as strategic tax planning. Judge Sorrells was not persuaded. The most devastating moment of the trial came on October 14, 2022.
Robert Dean, the forensic accountant, took the stand. For 2 hours, he walked the court through every single transfer, date by date, dollar by dollar. He showed how each shell company had been funded exclusively by revenues flowing through Whitfield Capital Group during the marriage. He showed that Meridian Assets, LLC had been formed exactly 18 days after Claire had first asked about a discrepancy in their household account in June of 2020. The implication was clear. Daniel had started building his escape hatch the moment Claire showed any sign of awareness. Then, Margaret Holloway introduced Exhibit 34. It was a series of text messages recovered from Daniel's personal phone during discovery. In one exchange, dated August 2021, Daniel had written to Tessa Malone, "Once the structure is clean, she gets nothing. That was always the plan." The courtroom went completely silent. Judge Sorrells removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench. Bradford Sims did not object. Margaret Holloway turned to face the gallery and said, "That was always the plan. The defendant said it himself. The only question before this court is whether this victim finally gets justice." On November 3, 2022, Judge Patricia Elaine Sorrells issued her ruling. She awarded Claire Whitfield 100% of all assets held within the 7 shell companies, a total of $9.4 million, finding them to constitute marital property fraudulently concealed during divorce proceedings. She further awarded Claire an additional $1.8 million, representing her equitable share of the Charlotte condominium and 4 years of diverted marital revenues. Total award, $11.2 million. Daniel Whitfield was found in civil contempt for his attempted offshore transfer after service of process. The Davidson County District Attorney's Office filed criminal charges of financial fraud, perjury, and fraudulent conveyance. Daniel pleaded guilty in February 2023 to 2 counts of fraudulent conveyance and 1 count of perjury. He was sentenced to 4 years in state prison and ordered to pay an additional $250,000 in legal fees and court costs. Claire Whitfield stood on the courthouse steps on November 3rd and said nothing to reporters. She put on her sunglasses. She took a slow breath. Then she got in her car and drove back to work. She spent 16 years giving her trust to a man who had been building a door out of their life from the very moment she started to see clearly. He thought the money was the most important thing he could take from her. But what he never understood, what men like Daniel Whitfield never understand, is that a woman who survives that kind of betrayal doesn't just want the money back. She wants the record to show exactly who he was. And now it does. If you were in Claire's position, if you found that wire transfer in the bottom of a drawer, what would you have done next? Tell us in the comments below. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Divorce Diaries, new true crime courtroom stories every week, because the truth always leaves a paper trail.